So past and future, when I say they don't exist, they exist, but only in linguistics, only as a conversation. So it's a memory or it's an imagination, right? It's a projection of something that we call future. But in both cases, and this is quite revelatory if somebody really understands it, your past and your future are actually occurring now.
This episode is brought to you by Mayer Nutrition. Welcome to the Mind Gut Conversation podcast. In this episode, I sit down with Peter Crone, known as the Mind Architect, whose work as a life coach and spiritual teacher has reached millions around the world. We explore his unique approach to dissolving human suffering, moving beyond limiting subconscious narratives, and accessing greater freedom, love, and possibility. Our conversation touches on Eastern philosophy, the science of the subconscious, and practical ways to step out of fear, anxiety, and self-judgment into an authentic way of living. Peter's insights bridge ancient wisdom with modern psychology, offering a roadmap toward inner liberation and a deeper sense of ease in our daily lives. Some of the topics we discussed include letting go of past and future narratives that shape our behavior, the roots of feeling not good enough and how to transcend it, and redefining peace as success through radical acceptance. Welcome to the show, Peter. So we've never met before, and honestly, I've not been following your amazing online presence as an educator, life coach, spiritual guide until recently. And it would be an understatement to say that I'm greatly impressed by what you have done for so many people from different paths of life. It's really remarkable. Part of my ignorance is explained by the fact that we come to this conversation from very different directions, which has happened for me with many podcasts that, I've had very little in common with the past of some of the people I talk to, but we somehow met in the present time. So my own path has led me through 40 years of fairly successful scientific career, longstanding interest in spirituality, decades of helping patients overcome physical and mental problems. So if you could explain how you became the counselor to literally millions of people in the world.
Seems like a big undertaking when you phrase it like that. No pressure to be the counselor for millions of people around the world. Yes, it's definitely been a work in progress. And I feel, for myself, that one, I think I'm very relatable, right? I grew up in Southeast England and was orphaned at a very young age, meaning I went through my own trials and tribulations. My mum died of cancer when I was 7. My dad went to work one day when I was 17, and he worked on the ferries, which, you may recall coming from Europe, that went between Dover and Calais and Dover and Zeebrugge. And so I think at one level, I'm relatable because I'm human and I've been through my own trials and tribulations like everybody. I think also something that I'm often complimented with is my patience, my kindness, my compassion, that I don't come from any judgment. I let people be who they are, and whatever they've been through is their journey and it's not to be judged. So I think there's a safety that people feel, which I believe is primal in any kind of relationship for us to feel safe. And then I'd say lastly, I think I'm just sharing something that appeals to the beings that we are. I'm speaking about these, what I would assert are fundamental truths that everyone can relate to. It's not Peter Crone's method or my system. I'm really just pointing out what is. When you remove all of the illusions and the narratives and the dialogues and the fictitious stories of inadequacy that we can all relate to on the human level, there's something that I think is, consistent and ubiquitous amongst all humans, which is, call it our soul, our spirit, and the inherent qualities of that, which is, for me, as you've probably heard me talk about, is freedom and love and pure possibility. And so I feel that's why millions of people have gravitated to my work, because not only am I inviting them to step into a much more authentic and inspirational version of themselves, but I'm helping them very practically to understand why they suffer so that they can stop that. And last I checked, being able to step out of your own suffering and into a world of freedom, it's pretty popular. So I think that's why I've been able to, very humbly reach millions of people around the world.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, listening to you, so I mean, I have a long-standing interest in Buddhist philosophy and
Hmm.
practicing it, and so I can hear a lot of similarities in some ways. It's almost like a modern version applied to the suffering of people today, not a couple of thousand years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also an individual that I connected with, this Indian guru named Satguru. I don't know if you've heard of him. So,
I've
uh,
heard of him. Yeah. I went to a talk once. A friend of mine had him on his podcast and invited me. Yeah. He's a character.
it's been interesting where my interest in the microbiome has taken me, because they invited me to a conference by the Center for Planetary Consciousness at Harvard to give a talk. And the question was, does the microbiome have intelligence or consciousness? Because it's a
Uh,
ubiquitous entity, it's all interconnectedness.
yeah.
And so his answer was yes, intelligence, yes, consciousness, no. And I've sort of been thinking about this a lot, about this topic. So, how do you see yourself in this in this world of Eastern philosophy? I would say. I mean, you must have been influenced by it when you were younger, or
Yeah, for sure. I mean, much of my work was influenced by the Vedas. So that's more under the umbrella of Hinduism, right? So I don't consider myself to be religious. If I were to put myself within a bracket, it would be more spiritual, right? Which is sort of, I think religion tends to divide, whether that's intentional or not, whereas spirituality tends to unite. But as part of my studies, I became an Ayurveda practitioner. So Ayurveda being the sort of the philosophy of healing and the practical lifestyle that would accompany yoga, which is more the deep esoteric, inner revelation of our own moksha and freedom, liberation, and then Ayurveda supports the physical human part with your different doshas and diet and lifestyle. So I think that really shaped a lot of my understanding of this human journey, where we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I'm not so familiar with all of the principles of either, Buddhists or Buddhism or Sadhguru. I've heard some of his talks. He has a prolific presence on Instagram. And I think he's got a shared sense of humor, which I always appreciate. Like a lot of people compliment me on my comedic qualities as much as my philosophical capacities. And I think it's important to be able to bring both, because we're all doing the best we can. And ultimately, we're all kind of clueless, right? So I don't want to sort of be put on a pedestal preaching gospel, but rather point out some fundamental truths and then, bring in a little bit of lightheartedness where appropriate. So I can see some parallels there. I do know in Buddhism, they talk a lot about suffering. And I believe, the Four Noble Truths point to, desire being one of the underpinnings or one of the pillars of suffering, which I don't think is inaccurate. I just think it's a little insufficient, because if you understand the nature of desire, as mammals, we want to avoid pain and we seek pleasure. So that's in that realm of desire, right? Even if not wanting is still a form of wanting, right? We don't want to be in pain is still a want. So for me, when you understand that, it's just really the primordial imperative of every mammal is just to survive. And for me, that's where suffering starts, is because we're under the illusion that we're separate. And if we're separate, then there is an automatic commensurate behavioral adaptation, which is trying to make it in life. So my work is dissolving a lot of that illusion so that we realize, oh, I'm part of life. I'm part of the gang. I can't not be part of the gang. And so that helps to, dissipate some of this automated need to make it and to survive, which then dissipates suffering. So I often use the catchphrase of I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. And so I think the likes of Sadhguru and Buddhism, they're pointing to dogmas and philosophies that are inspiring. At one level, I would say somewhat true. What I'm pointing to is uh, why people suffer. Right. So mine's a little bit more practical versus instructional, right? There's a lot of coaches and spiritual teachers who do this, don't do that. You need to meditate twice a day and it becomes instructional. Whereas I like to empower people to understand why they suffer in the first place, because then through their own dissolution of whatever narratives that they garnered from being children who thought they were not loved or wanted or not safe or not good enough, in the eradication of the narrative that's based in some sort of negation of ourselves, meaning it's against ourselves, then the things that Buddhism point to, which is moksha, liberation, these satori moments happen automatically, right? So we're getting to the same result. Mine, I think, is a little bit more practical. It helps people understand. I often use this crass example. It's like if you were to put someone in a hypnotic state with the right guidance, you could give them this euphoric experience, almost orgasmic, right? In a hypnotic state. And then you bring them back to reality and they're like, whoa, that was amazing. But they don't know how they got there, right? And so I like to give people the treasure as well as the map to the treasure, right? So that's where I think my work differentiates itself from some of these more esoteric dogmas where they point to something, but they don't necessarily educate or inform or inspire the participant to be empowered as to understand why they're not there in the first place and then how to get there. So
Yeah.
that's how I would differentiate my work. It's Virgo. I'm very practical. I'm a grounded man. I enjoy my human experience. I play sports and enjoy good food. So I'm not trying to sit in a cave and levitate. So I like to bring the merging of these very profound philosophies of consciousness, but equally optimize the human experience and merge the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a common theme in your teachings and teachings of other wise men is the importance to live in the present and not be guided in our behaviors by things that either happen in the past or that might happen in the future.
Yeah.
You stated that past and future actually doesn't exist, a pretty radical statement. And another famous quote from you says, what happened, happened, and if it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. It takes a while to figure out what this actually means.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. I'm not denying the nature of chronological time that, you and I have got a history that we can remember, but we're never in our past and we're never in our future. So past and future, when I say they don't exist, they exist, but only in linguistics, only as a conversation. So it's a memory or it's an imagination, right? It's a projection of something that we call future. But in both cases, and this is quite revelatory if somebody really understands it, your past and your future are actually occurring now. So let's take a very benign, simple example. If somebody is going to a birthday party, it's today, whatever, Tuesday, and they're going to a birthday party Friday evening in 3 days from now, but they're single and their friend is bringing a girlfriend or a boyfriend for them to meet who they know a little bit about, and they're excited and maybe even attracted to with the prospect of a potential relationship, then the way that they function, given that perceived future, is influencing who they are today. So the future is occurring now, the past is occurring now, because if somebody recalls a trial or a tribulation that they went through, a disappointment, a failure, they can also in instant moment experience guilt or shame or disappointment or anger. It's not that they're in the history, but they're having a memory that is occurring now. So why that to me is so profound is because you start to recognize the power of what it is to be a human being, and the fact that, without sounding too poetic, we're all magicians, right? We have the capacity through language and our own imagination and visualization to generate an experience. So in Hebrew text, the translation of the word abracadabra, which we've all heard in, magic shows, especially as kids, abracadabra and the rabbit comes out of the hat. The actual Aramaic translation of abracadabra is as I speak, so I create. So you start to understand the power of the word. In the beginning was the word, if you want to lean into sort of more Christian philosophies. the kingdom of the Lord is within you. You know, there's all of these pointers in Buddhism. You are Buddha, right? So for me, language becomes the access to time psychologically and emotionally. So when you become very discerning in the way that we speak about our history or declare things about our future, we start to realize, wow, they're occurring now in language, and I'm generating the experience associated with the words that I'm using in either past or future tense. And so that's the access to me to power and magic. Is you're not having anxiety because there's something bad going to happen in the future. Anxiety is the byproduct of your own mind creating an illusion of a future that hasn't happened yet, generating in present time the experience of anxiety. That's how powerful we are.
Mm.
Equally, the shame and guilt that we can have now is because we're remembering with judgment and criticism something that we did. So now to the quote, why it's so powerful, and I think there's at least, as far as we know, 15 people who have it tattooed on their body around the world because they've submitted photos. And one of the stories is very powerful. But what happened couldn't happen any other way because it didn't. To me, is a invitation for the human brain to, through logic and intelligence, reconcile and let go of your history, because that's the first step to freedom. The brain and the ego will only hold on to historical events to prove its own shortcomings. You know, oh, if my parents hadn't divorced, I would have a better shot at a good relationship, a healthy partner, whatever. If, my dad had actually showed me affection. And so we only hold on to our history to prove some limitation, which is really the ego's prerogative because it's illusory. So it needs evidence to hold on to the deepest sense of, I'm not wanted, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, whatever it is. So that to me is the only purpose of history. So the quote helps people to basically get over themselves and realize that every human being's history couldn't be different, because quite literally it's what happened and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't happen any other way. So even the conversation, oh, I could have done this or I should have done that, it all becomes moot because you couldn't. Every human being is making choices at the moment of making a choice within the limits of their current awareness. That's why it's called hindsight, because if I personally were to look back at some of the choices I made, I could judge the shit out of myself. But I don't, because I'm not who I am now is not who I was then when I made the choice.
Yeah.
So it's a profound way of accepting life, bringing forgiveness to ourselves, and not denying our history, but learning from it by profoundly surrendering to every choice we made and accepting that we are flawed humans and doing the best we can. So that's why that quote is probably one of my most popular, because it reconciles a lot of pain for people, because the guilt and shame that is associated with judging our history can literally be dissolved.
It's almost like a Zen koan. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you have to think about it, and at some point it hits you. Then you really get the idea. It's not obvious in the beginning for most people what this means.
No, but it's when you really get it, it is incredibly liberating, right? Because it becomes a statement of physics. It's not even spiritual. Often people have said, oh, you're one of the greatest spiritual teachers, and that's lovely to hear. And I'm not in any way refuting it, but I'm really talking about the principles of physics, right? So this becomes one of those undeniable statements that, okay, so you did something that you have a lot of shame about as a kid, or even as a teen, or God forbid, as a person who was an adult and they screamed at their kids and they're embarrassed about it. I get it. And I'm not saying don't be informed by your past and learn from it to become hopefully a better member of society. But to consistently beat the shit out of yourself because of what you did is only propagating the very underlying sense of judgment that you're trying to escape by thinking you could have had a different history, right? So it becomes a vicious cycle. So
Yeah.
when you look at it through the lens of physics, it's the access to freedom, because it's like, well, it couldn't have been different because it wasn't. The question is, can you accept that, learn from it, and then turn around, and instead of looking over your shoulder at things you've done, look forward to what you're, declaring and committed to creating.
Yeah. So It makes me think about our own research. A lot of it is focused on these early adverse life events,
Mm-hmm.
which, as you know, play a big role in pretty most chronic diseases. I've actually, I think it was last weekend, was at a conference in San Diego, where Gabriel Mate talked, gave a 1 hour talk, standing ovation. He's definitely somebody people look
Yeah.
up to as a hero. And he also talked about this. So the importance, I mean, happened to him personally with the Holocaust, and I followed this actually quite closely. Holocaust survivors, just kind of two remarkable paths people have gone. Some live into their hundreds and are seemingly completely happy and content with themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
um, are forgiving, and kind of remarkable that somebody who's gone through this can do this. But others stick to this experience and it influences every part of their behavior today.
Yeah.
So do humans have a choice how to deal with that? So, both are aware of what happened to them, but they have a choice which direction they're going to live their lives.
Yeah. Choice is an interesting conversation. So I would say there's something called literal choice and figurative choice. So everybody has figurative choice. It occurs to, on a very simple everyday example, if you walk into a frozen yogurt store to buy some yogurt with toppings, it looks like you have choice, right? Like you could have a kid's cone, a waffle cone, a big cup, a medium cup, a small cup, whatever the size and the delivery. You can have a choice of the flavors. Do you want just vanilla, vanilla and chocolate swirl? Do you want strawberry? Do you want pistachio? And then you maybe have a choice of 10 to 20 different toppings. So it all looks like you're making choices, but, and that's a powerful stance. But unfortunately, because of the human disposition, we're actually making decisions, which may seem like semantics, but to decide is to cut, right? So homicide, pesticide, decide, it has this sort of a killing nature, which is really we're making choices based on what we have asserted through time doesn't work for us. Now I'm going to get the vanilla because I don't like the chocolate, right?
Mhm, mhm,
So it's a decision, not a choice. For me, choice is always, it's generative, it's in the moment, it's out of nowhere, it's not because of something else. So most people are making what they think are choices because of something, which means actually it's a reaction. And if it's a reaction, it's not a choice. It's almost like you're being informed. In the UK where I grew up, you're from Europe too, when I came to America, it was almost overwhelming to walk into a frozen yogurt store
right.
because in England, you basically got a soft serve vanilla with a flake or not a flake. That was it. You had one of two choices. So it was relatively simpler, and people talk about this in psychology, right? The fact that there's this choice fatigue now that humans have way too many choices and they don't know what to do. So, in the case of what you're talking about with people's history and Holocaust survivors or people who've been very, traumatized through very horrific events, you could say they both have a choice, but they don't, right? Because, of course, it looks better that the person who is now at peace and they forgave the Nazis or whoever caused harm or abuse to their family is living a much more empowered and liberated life. So of course that's a better choice, but we could apply that to everyday simple examples again of like the person who quit smoking made a better choice than the person who's still smoking when we've got decades of evidence that smoking's bad. So then why, when you know that it's bad for you, do people still do these things that are self-abusive? So that's then just through simple intelligence, you can realize there's no choice. Because if it was a real, genuine choice, everyone would not smoke. Everybody would go to the gym all the time. Everybody would generate a good income. So really, choice in that case is figurative. It's illusory. Really, what's happening is people are being driven by their conditioning, which is what I'm revealing. So someone knows that they shouldn't smoke, but because at a deeper level, what they're oblivious to in the subconscious is that they think they're not wanted or they're a failure because of what transpired in their childhood. So consciously, they know smoking is bad, but they've been conditioned at a deeper level through their own trauma for 3, 4, 5 decades to think that they're a loser, which gives them an experience internally of suffering. And when they were 15, they found relief through cigarettes and nicotine. And so that's still their mechanism of escape from a prison that they still haven't brought awareness to reconcile and escape from. So that's why my work is dissolving these subconscious prisons. Then you can actually have choice because you're not being informed by something that you're reacting to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So, I mean, in some ways, if you, think about psychoanalysis or dream analysis, I mean, people trying to do the same thing,
Yeah.
to go back to these traumatic experiences and emotions tied up with it. And um, I don't know how successful, if you did a controlled study, psychoanalysis has been. I personally have experienced Jungian analysis for several years and got pretty good in the dream analysis and,
Hmm.
eh, you know, connected to my inner self in a way that I've never been before. I always listen to other people's advice and I've completely abandoned this. I've never asked anybody again, what should I do? Because I know it's
Yeah.
inside of me,
Yeah.
but you must have found that with you working on the unconscious or subconscious of people, you have been successful changing that, some of these automatic reactions.
100%. It's phenomenal. It never gets old. I always say, I'm always amazed but never surprised because I've seen it so many times now that without, reducing a human being to some sort of computer program, we're ultimately just conditioned beings, right? So what I'm working in the realm of the mind, there is programming, there's language, and even if we look at it from the genetic level, right, it's a form of code, right? That you have what looks like brown eyes, I have slightly blue gray eyes, so that's for someone who knows how to read the genome, there's a piece of code that explains that, right? And so there's this hierarchy to me of the different levels of language. And so what I'm working on is sort of perhaps the language is just above genetics, which is deep subconscious programming that's kind of primal. Maybe there's real primal instincts of kill or be killed if you're in a threatening situation. But the subconscious just above that is driving for the most part all of our thoughts, feelings, actions,
Mhm.
and then results. And humans want results, typically different results than the ones they have, but they don't understand the genesis of results. So I reverse engineer. Usually when you go and see an expert and you have some sort of results, I've worked with a lot of pro athletes, high end performers. They might go and see a coach in baseball, golf, whatever it is, and the coach says, don't do this, right? It's instructional. And the same if someone goes to a business development specialist or an entrepreneur who seeks some sort of management consulting, usually, or even someone who goes to a doctor, doctors like, would do this, take this pill, 3 times a day, 3 months and come back and see me. But all of that approach of generating a different results is to me superficial, transitory, and it leads to a lot of frustration because people don't understand why they generated the previous results in the first place. So for me, when you get to the deep source code in the subconscious and you can reveal that and then investigate the validity of it is what I call, like, meaning, is it really true that you're not good enough? Well, no, it's just my brother was smarter, faster, better athlete. Okay, but that doesn't mean you weren't good enough. That's what you made up as a kid. And then you've lived inside of that prison for 40 years. So it's become a truth. And now you're in middle management on 3 medications and going through your second divorce, right? These are the byproducts of you thinking you're not enough. And the way you communicate and the way that you feel and the way that you interact in life has to be commensurate with that subconscious code. So for me, again, not reducing a human being to just programming, but who we are as a walking conversation. And if we can reveal the deeper conversations that define us, then that's the process of true liberation and why I love what I get to do. Because bringing awareness to fundamental lies about ourselves that are almost from factory settings set to self destruction, the
Mm.
ego tends to be set to limitation. Then once you step outside of that, it's an entirely new world of pure freedom and possibility.
We'll be right back to the episode, but I want to take a quick pause to share something I'm truly excited about. As many of you know, my research has long focused on the brain gut microbiome system. One of the areas I have been particularly fascinated by is polyphenols and how these magic molecules interact with this system. Polyphenols are compounds found in all plant foods and are especially abundant in blueberries, pomegranates, and grapes. While they are a key component for plants to aid in preventing and treating diseases, when we eat them, they play a similar role in our bodies. Once eaten, these compounds are transformed by our gut microbes into active molecules. These molecules then travel throughout the body, supporting brain function, improving cardiovascular health, helping balance your gut microbiome, and increasing energy. That's why, together with my son Dylan, we created Mayer Nutrition and launched our flagship product, Synaptic Bloom. Synaptic Bloom is a high potency quercetin blend that contains a diverse spectrum of supporting polyphenols designed to give you the daily diversity most people miss in their diet. According to the CDC, 90% of Americans do not eat enough fruits and vegetables and are likely missing out on the amount and variety of these compounds for optimal health. It's an easy way to support your brain, heart, gut, and your long-term health. You can learn more at mayernutrition.com and use the code MINDGUT for 10% off your first order. I leave the link in the description. Now back to the episode. I mean, I imagine based on your, teachings that the majority of people that you interact with have this, this wrong code of this feeling of inadequacy or not enough, or
Yeah.
this is almost like a human condition. Certainly,
Yeah.
maybe not in Bhutan, where happiness is the
The highest.
primary concern of the government. Even
Yeah.
this being the cause of chronic anxiety and unhappiness, if you're not content with who you are.
Yeah.
Why is this feeling so prevalent? Are all the parents doing the wrong programming, or is society doing this? Or why is this so common?
I would assert because it's the raison d'etre of being human. It's why we're here, right? So this dimension of planet Earth, again, this is going to take a little bit of flexing from people's imaginations, but I would assert that planet Earth is the dimension within which beings come to reconcile their fears and constraints. So we're all here because ultimately we arrived with these feelings of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity. And this particular paradigm is set up perfectly for those constraints to be revealed. Now, most people don't look at it that way. They really think their mother-in-law is a bitch and their dad is an asshole and their neighbor's a pain and, whatever. So they put all of the power outside of them. And so they don't get to, transcend those constraints. But what I'm teaching people is, no, you came here as a being who is inherently timeless, boundless, and limitless, but you're still entangled with some fears and limitations. So this is the perfect dimension to transcend and mitigate those. And so that's why it's so common, because that's why we're all here. It is human to feel inadequate. It is human to be concerned with your own sense of survival and security. It is human to look through the lens of lack and scarcity until you recognize that's all part of the illusion. And so that is awakening, that is moksha, that is enlightenment, right? And that's to me, when real choice occurs, you're not being informed by your conditioning, but you've stepped into the arena of pure potential and possibility. Then you make choices, not being informed by reaction to things you don't want or constraints.
So do you find, I imagine the answer is yes. I mean, do you find this sense of inadequacy even amongst some of the most successful people you interact with in the business world or in the sports world, or
100% of the time. Yeah. And oftentimes it's what's generated their success, because they were informed by the discomfort, the suffering, and the dis-ease of feeling that they weren't loved, they weren't wanted, they weren't good enough. And so typically one of the coping strategies of the human brain is as a compensation to overcome and disprove whatever we feel that is ultimately creating suffering, right? We're trying to avoid pain and create pleasure. So even some of the biggest Hollywood stars who have millions of dollars and certainly millions of fans can still end up in rehab with the addictive nature of their ego, which is still based in suffering, from which they found relief in cocaine or LSD or, meth or whatever they do. So it's got nothing to do with the circumstances of our lives, but rather the way that we relate to the circumstances of our lives. And so, yeah, no matter the success I've, witnessed in people that I've been fortunate enough to help, every human being by design has at the core of their subconscious what I call these 10 primal prisons. They just do. It's just the nature of what it is to be human and why we're here. But that also becomes why it's such a great game, not to in any way dismiss the suffering that a lot of people go through. And some circumstances people face are really horrific, but nonetheless, the opportunity of being here as a human is, like I call it's the ultimate cosmic hide and seek. It's like spiritual Houdini. We arrive in the straitjackets of our own subconscious, and the opportunity is to break free, and then hopefully be sufficiently inspired by what you see, which is what I now have, that you want to help other people break free too. And that becomes a true calling.
So you've been able to make that breakthrough. You would say that you're not influenced to a significant degree by
I
these.
think it would be naive of me to say there might not be still some code that occasionally it's just more refined. It's more subtle. It's not the day to day where I'm on 6 medications and, in domestic abuse situations where I can't stand my partner or I scream at kids or, I would consider myself to be one of the most loving, genuine, authentic, kind human beings. And I'm still, at times being informed by maybe an old pattern because of a new circumstance that was eliciting maybe an older limitation. But I would say it doesn't inform me anymore. It doesn't define me, but I could still have the feeling, and that's okay. So I'm definitely still happy to be human and be a work in progress. I'm not walking on water at this stage. So I've definitely got some things to look at, but I guess I'm sufficiently at the bow of the boat that I can still lead others to at least break through some of their more persistent and old constraints that I would say, yes, I've broken free from.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say personally, after listening to you and reading some of the statements that you've made, I'm personally affected by this as well. By the same mind game, and have been aware of it, have been working on it, but I just find it extremely difficult to get rid of it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
I mean, if I look at my life now, I mean, I pretty much have accomplished, my professional career, wouldn't have to worry about any competition, writing more papers.
yeah,
Like in that world that I lived in, it's all you're not as good as your competitors.
yeah,
And to get out of this now, even where I don't have these pressures on me, it's not easy. I mean, and I was going to ask you your opinion on this. So I've had some last couple of years experiences with close friends with psychedelics, with psilocybin, and
hmm,
have felt that was in some ways the most remarkable, like almost instant way of getting there where you would like to be. That everything looks
yeah,
beautiful, and it's obviously not a state that, I mean, people talk about the neuroplastic effects of psilocybin.
yeah.
Um, if that's a long-lasting effect, I don't know. But I mean, what do you think about psychedelics? Do you use them at all yourself in your in your
I
interaction?
haven't. I haven't used them at all. I've never exposed myself to them. I haven't had a draw or a calling for whatever reason. I've always been more of I guess, a purist and sort of love that more jnana yoga approach of using intellect and buddhi or the Buddha within. That's not to say I wouldn't be open to in the future under the right circumstances or with the right practitioner who I feel is, truly authentic in their practice. I think nowadays it's like anything, it's become a little bit diluted. You can go anywhere in
Yeah,
LA where you're at and just someone's doing an ayahuasca ceremony for the weekend, and it's
yeah,
like
yeah. Okay.
people were partying the weekend before and now they're having these, life-changing epiphanies, but also a lot of suffering that comes to the surface. So that's my personal experience. So I can't really speak to it directly, but what I can share through my own intuition and being able to feel into the power of these experiences. And also I have a ton of friends who lead ceremonies. They've gone to Peru and done the real traditional dieta before and the whole process. And I think one of the nicest compliments I got from a friend who leads ceremonies, she said, you're like human ayahuasca, so I guess I'm giving people that same glimpse. The one reservation I have about psychedelics is I do hear wonderful stories and these profound poetic visions that people have, but I've yet to meet a human being personally who has, through psychedelics, become a human who lives an extraordinary life that I wish to emulate, right?
Mhm.
Meaning,
Mhm.
it's great that people have these experiences. People go to new restaurants and they go to fun parks and have great experiences, right? Obviously, in the realm of psychedelics, it's more prophetic and profound, and it can give glimpses of unity and God and love. But I think what's missing is akin to what my hypnotic example earlier, that people have experiences, but they don't know, one, how to get there or how to sustain it, or two, more profoundly, what's in the way of it.
Mhm.
Right. So, and that's why I've seen a lot of people who continually chase the euphoria of the experience by having these consistent ceremonies or psychedelic moments. Right. I'm much more interested in helping people reveal that euphoric nature and that love and unity that I assert is our inherent quality by seeing what's in the way.
Mhm.
Right. So it's that's similar to Buddhism, right? Neti neti, not this, not that, right? It's again why I say I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. It's a revelatory process, my work. It's removing what's in the way, and then naturally what comes to the surface is that euphoric experience of one's own divinity that might be found through a psychedelic experience, but on the other side of the ego, right? So it's kind of like you can make somebody look pretty by putting on makeup on their skin. That's an experience where a woman could feel more confident, similar to a psychedelic experience. Or you could clean up the digestive tract, the food they're eating, and the process of metabolism from the inside such that their skin glows naturally, right? Does that make sense as a
I
sort of
know,
an
absolutely.
analogy?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to say for me personally, the biggest benefit was it definitely convinced me of this, um so we don't just have this, fight and flight genetically determined mechanism inside of us and, fear but we also have this other side in us because it's gotta be inside us, and it's gotta be inside of us. It's not in the mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who takes them and has the right environment has a similar experience of this interconnectedness. So
Yeah.
there's definitely something that you can access, and that certainly convinced me there's this other part of our brains that, you teach people to reach with, and I've
Yeah.
tried myself for, most of my life with contemplative practices, and
Yeah.
so this is definitely, I wouldn't say it's a substitute, it's just a helper or an assistant to get to the same point.
For sure. I think for the right people, it's amazing. And I think one of the other components that is beneficial of a psychedelic experience that I didn't speak to that I think is important to cover is we as human beings, to a certain degree, rely on inspiration in order to inform choices or actions, right? So if a kid aspires to be a professional soccer player or baseball player, he's going to watch his favorite team and his favorite players as a means of tapping into aspiration and inspiration, right? He sees what's possible.
Mhm,
So I think what psychedelics do for a lot of people who maybe don't have the EQ or IQ to tap into something intuitively of what's possible, they get an actual glimpse through the medicine of what's possible. So it can become then a pursuit and an aspiration, again, hopefully through integration, not continuing to have just psychedelic experiences to have the moment and the experience, but you start to become aware of, oh, wow, that's truly possible. And so it can alter, I think, the timeline of a human being and what they become committed to pursuing versus what they thought before the experience was that it was all about making more money, moving into a bigger home, finding the right one. And, that's a good life. And so I think it awakens something that wasn't previously available to people's perception. And I think that can be invaluable.
Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it.
Yeah.
So I've one more topic I want to run by you.
Sure.
Even though it would have been nice to end it with with this positive note.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've run into in my career, um, and we're dealing with a lot in our papers, and it's this concept that the brain is the most effective prediction machine on the planet. That so we don't. And this is somewhat against your teachings, and I'm really curious to hear your opinion.
Yeah.
That that our brain doesn't just live in the moment; it constantly makes predictions about the next 5 minutes, the next
Mm.
hour, the next day, the next year,
Yeah.
and you don't know it. It's just programmed into the brain. If it makes the wrong predictions, so if you're a traumatized person and it makes predictions that create anxiety, it's not adaptive for you. On the other hand, I think it's a biological mechanism. So how do you change that, or how do you take advantage of it?
Yeah. I think it's great. And I think it's the most powerful instrument we have, right? I often say the brain is designed to predict and protect. And I would assert that it's in that order, right? Meaning that the prediction mechanism is a coping strategy for protection. So
Mhm,
again, going back to what I said earlier, through the illusion of being a separate self, because of the way that we perceive ourselves and speak of ourselves as individuals, not part of the gang, then we have no choice but to try and survive, whatever that is. The competition in a sport, the competition in the workplace, the competition as, a man pursuing a woman against other men. It's all at some level about survival. And so for sure, having a brain that can anticipate, predict, speculate is a wonderful tool. However, as is the unavoidable arc of a human being's experience and journey, we're going to go through suffering, trials, and tribulations. And so that's why one of my other quotes that came through me is that past hurt informs future fear.
mm,
So when there's this maladaptive way that the brain is predicting a future, it's typically as a reaction to a history that was hurtful. So we're
mm,
now trying to avoid past hurt. I'll give you a very simple example. I worked with, one of the more famous NBA players, basketball players in the States. And he was famous not just because he was talented, but he also had the worst free throw shooting average in the league. And when you're missing, if you're shooting 2 out of 8, 25%, or 3 out of 10, 30%, when the average is 77%, 7 to 8 out of 10, that delta of 4 to 5 points could be the difference in a win or a loss for the team. So
mm,
it's significant, right? And so when I went to his house to ask him, what was going on, and I said, how do you feel when you step up at the line? He said, well, I'm just nervous and I'm trying not to miss. So the brain is doing its job of prediction, but in this case, he's being informed by past hurt, which
mm,
is generating fear and anxiety, which is again the maladaptive way that the brain is trying to get us to survive. So he knows missing is embarrassing. It's going to affect his contract. The crowd is booing. It could lead to a loss versus a win. There's so much pressure.
mm,
So prediction in that case to me becomes self-fulfilling, where it's a much more thought-provoking distinction I make, but most people's futures are not created, they're remembered. And what that points to is it's a remembrance of a history you're still trying to avoid.
mhm,
So
mhm,
then it's not actually a future. There's no possibility there. And that's again where it becomes a method of predicting a history that you're actually trying to avoid, which is, as everybody's heard, the self-fulfilling prophecy of the mind. That
mm,
is self-sabotage. So whilst I get your point, and yes, it is helpful to have a piece of machinery, a tool like the mind to predict, I think it's very slippery if you rely on it like most people do without understanding the unconscious ramifications of where the information is coming from. Because when I really got the insanity of the human brain, the future for everybody is completely unknown. right? That's why it is at best a prediction. Even stock markets, with all of the algorithms and the AI that people use now, they still can't fully predict whether their stock is going to go up or down, right? Some guys obviously are better than others, but it's still at best
Yeah.
speculation. It's gambling. So if you understand that the nature of life is uncertainty, we're all oblivious to what really is going to happen. I didn't know I was going to be having this response to your question. Then you recognize, okay, when we have fear or anxiety, which affects 500 million people on the planet, then it's your own brain that is creating the illusion of a future that hasn't happened yet into an unknown, which is the nature of life, right? So when people say they're scared of the unknown, that's a misnomer. You can't be scared of the unknown because it's not known. What you're scared of is what your own brain is predicting
Mhm.
and putting into the unknown.
Mhm.
Then that same brain that imagined a worst case scenario is trying to avoid it. That's when you realize the insanity of what it is to be human. One brain creates a problem and then tries to avoid the very problem it
Yeah.
made up.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way of putting this.
Yeah. So prediction, yes, great. And listen, I'm prolifically creative. I'm writing books. I'm developing live events and workshops. I have my online programs, but when it's tied to an emotion that is an extension of the deep code of survival, then I would say that prediction is a disservice to the human experience. It's reactive. What I invite people to step into is the same power of imagination, but not from a reactive state, but from a creative state. You
Mhm.
make up a future that is not remembered, that you're trying to avoid, but one that you declare as a future you're inspired by versus scared of.
Yeah, I think this is a really good way of ending our conversation. I mean, I could, have quite a few other topics I would love
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get your opinion on. It's definitely something like you wouldn't expect somebody like myself who spent, 45 years in science, in hardcore science, and
Yeah.
that you know, but I personally have always had that interest, that spiritual dimension. And might have gone into something like this before I decided to go into medical school, coming back to the same question that
Yeah.
we started out with. But I just find that, but particularly with increasing age, I mean, like what you're saying, obviously it's important for performers,
Hmm.
actors, athletes, but it also takes on a whole different dimension when you're older, when you sort of ask yourself,
Yeah.
the meaning of things, and get upset about the fact that you know, even at my age, I still my brain wastes my time with feeling like it's not been enough. That there needs to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's a lifelong. It, in my view, it's really a lifelong endeavor that a lot of people are not aware of it. But I think listening to you and
Yeah.
seeing your success, it's definitely something a lot of people can benefit from. I mean,
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I really invite you to consider as a very smart, compassionate man who teaches, from what I understand, some really profound science as well, that even the illusion of aging is just that. It's an illusion, right? You're an eternal being. And if Emeran is misidentified with the human form, then it looks like you're aging. And so that informs how you feel. And I'm not denying the accumulative effect of what we've eaten or what we did or the toxins we've accumulated or the issues we've had that can compromise the integrity of the human vehicle. But underneath it, there's no aging. There's no aging. So when
yeah.
I talk at these longevity events or I talk about health, I'm really inviting people to consider that the biggest obstacle to true vitality is the constraints of the mind. And one of those constraints is that I'm getting old, right?
Mhm.
And so the actual narrative of aging is itself the precursor to the symptoms and experiences of aging. That's again going back to abracadabra. As I speak, so I create. And again, I don't wish to appeal to fool's gold where I'm telling people to deny, the human experience. I don't for 1 minute think I'm going to live forever, but most people don't think I'm as old as I am. And I play sports with people half my age. And I would say I haven't lost any speed, maybe some strength, but that's because I also know I haven't worked out for a while because I'm super busy traveling around the world freeing people's minds. So
Yeah.
it's just an invitation to you to maybe reconsider the topic of age even as some sort of impediment to freedom, vitality, joy, etc., etc. I often use the word disease as a way of explaining the symptoms of our anatomy and our physiology in the realm of disease are, as far as I'm concerned, typically, not always, but for the majority, the byproduct of the dis-ease, the absence of ease that exists in our emotional and psychological world.
Mm.
So one of the conversations of the fear of aging is a state of dis-ease, where we're worried. We were typically informed by a timeline that was generated from birth, right? As we're young, we're like, oh, I'm 12 years old, and we look from our birth, but we get to a certain tipping point, we start to look from our death, of how much time we have left. And so it's interesting, the psychology of time and age to me is a fascinating realm to see to what degree can we even transcend that. Again, not to live forever like the Brian Johnsons of the world who are, very big in the biohacking world of don't die, which to me is such
Yeah,
a
yeah,
such an interesting, way of looking at it, because he doesn't even realize he's being informed by what he doesn't want. It's like,
yeah,
don't die is like coming to a T junction in a road and saying, don't go left because you want to go right. So again, it's a reactive mindset. But anyway, suffice to say, we could talk about that for hours. But yeah, age is an interesting conversation. But my invitation to people is, the old adage, you don't grow old, but when you stop growing, you become old.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think this is a good point to close the conversation.
Yes,
It was great, Peter. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
it's
Maybe
my
sometime
pleasure.
in the future we can pick a specific topic like longevity or healthy aging and have
Yeah.
another conversation.
Be happy to. Yeah, and maybe, I've been invited more and more now to get involved in college and school systems. So if ever there's an opportunity where I could come and get involved with some of the stuff you're doing or at UCLA, that would also be fun.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I think it would be really good to hear.
Particular demographic need this more than anyone, especially teens, but again, the pressure, I don't want to get macabre, but the amount of suicidal ideations or attempts that happen in teens and colleges, I think if there's a group that could really benefit from freeing themselves from internal suffering, it's that group.
Yeah, and this whole phenomenon that even, a lot of depression and suicide amongst
Yeah,
doctors, which you would think is the ultimate job. You help people get paid for it. Well,
yeah,
why would you do that? I mean, yeah, I think
yeah.
this would be a good audience. I'll look into that.
Okay, cool. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the conversation. Lovely to be with you.
Okay, same here, Peter. Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.